This is an extraordinary moment. I'm Harley Shakin. I'm the chair of the Center for Latin American Studies, and I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of the Center and on behalf of the University of California, Berkeley. We're extraordinarily proud of this moment, of having Fernando Botero with us, of the exhibit on Abu Ghraib that we will be hosting, and of having everyone here for this conversation this afternoon. As we all know, this is a moment of extraordinary political and moral crisis in the United States. We're in the midst of a destructive war. We are at a moment of decision concerning disengaging from that war or expanding it. Art, at moments of human crisis, has an exceptional role. It allows us to clarify, to renew from a different perspective, to come to terms with the issues that are there. On the eve of the Second World War, there was difficult fighting throughout Spain in a bloody civil war. Battles throughout the country that almost all of us have forgotten. But as Fernando Botero has reminded us, few of us have forgotten Guernica. The power of that painting highlighted a small town in the Basque region of Spain where bombers were used for the first time against a civilian population. Fernando Botero has said, art is a permanent accusation. And it's coming to terms with that accusation that we will begin a conversation on tonight and move through a set of programs, Art in the Time of Conflict, that the Center for Latin American Studies is sponsoring this semester. Before introducing our participants in the conversation, just a few brief words on how this exhibit came to be. We first spoke to Mr. Botero on November 28th, 2006. And in the last 2 months, the entire exhibit has come to pass, and the academic program that accompanies it. As you know, or as many of you know, these works of art, this exceptional art that comprises the 47 paintings and drawings on exhibit, was offered to many museums throughout the United States and private galleries. None chose to show it. The Marlborough Gallery in New York exhibited the work for a month towards the end of last year. The first public showing is at the University of California, Berkeley. It is in a library, and in a way, in times of conflict, a library is an important shelter for works of controversy, and in this case, great artistic creation. Our expectation is that Berkeley will be the first, but hardly the last, of other museums and universities that will display these exceptional works. I'd like to thank in particular Bolt Hall School of Law and its Dean, Chris Edley, for some rather exceptional support. And the university library, the librarian, Tom Leonard, and the director, Beth Dupois, for playing an exceptional role. And finally, I'd like to thank the staff of the Center for Latin American Studies who turned this dream into a reality. And particularly our Vice Chair, Sarah Lampson. Now, this is the easy part, but also the difficult part. How do you introduce two exceptional artists? One a poet and one a painter and a sculptor. Their work speaks for itself better than any words, any introduction, the numerous awards and medals that both have won. But I'll be very brief. The works of Fernando Botero are in 46 museums throughout the world. They are also on the sidewalks and in parks, beloved throughout the Americas, in Europe, really throughout the world. The work speaks for itself in this extraordinary and intense collection that we hope many of you will see tonight and all of you will see in the coming weeks. Speaks far more eloquently than anything I could say. What I can say is how deeply honored we are to have him with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And my friend and colleague, Robert Haas, is equally difficult to introduce. Many awards, the Poet Laureate of the United States from 1995 to 97, but maybe one or two lines of his poetry. In the summer, peaches, the color of sunrise. In the fall, plums, the color of dusk. Robert Haas has done an extraordinary job as a poet and as someone deeply concerned with the core issues of our time. As such, there is no one more fitting for this conversation tonight. Fernando Botero and Robert Haas.
Well, I am very honored to have this conversation with the great American poet, Robert Haas. I'm very honored to have been invited by Berkeley University to do this exhibition that, like Professor Shaker, that was the responsibility that I'm here. Otherwise, I would not be, he was kind enough to invite me to come to Berkeley and do the exhibition. You know, this exhibition was refused for many museums and institutions, and finally, thanks to Professor Shaker, we are able to show to the public here in America, in this part of the state of the country, my paintings. I'm really very proud, very happy to do it. And of course, to have this conversation with the great American poet, Robert Haas.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I say the same thing. Harley Shaken and the people at the Center for Latin American Studies put on a world-class major showing of art in a month and a half and put together an academic program to go with it. And it's quite unbelievable that it got done and that we're here today. We owe him many, many thanks, Harley. The most important thing to do right now is a sound check, to make sure that everybody can hear Fernando Botero. So, how did that sound? Does the sound okay? A little louder?
Louder.
Can you turn it up there so that...
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question to begin, and then you tell us how the sound is, okay? So, maybe we start at the beginning, yes, and ask how these paintings came to be.
Well, the whole world was shocked with the revelation in the American press of that the Americans were torturing Iraqis in the Abu Ghraib prison. I read this in the New Yorker, in the famous article of Seymour Hersh. I was surprised, hurt, and angry, like everybody. The more I read, the more I was motivated and angry, upset. A few months later, I was in a plane going back to Paris and reading again on this tragedy. I took paper and pencil and started doing some drawings. And then when I got to my studio in Paris, I kept drawing, then painting, and it became like an obsession for 9 months, no, for 14 months. I was only working in this, thinking about this, and like an obsession. And suddenly I felt like empty, that I didn't have anything to say more. And peaceful. So for some reason, I was like in peace with myself. But for months, I felt this desire to say something. Because I thought it was an enormous violation of human rights. And I said before, you know, the United States has been like a model for compassion and a model of human rights, and then at the same time accuse everybody at the slightest violation. Then, suddenly that this could happen in these prisons that were administered by the Americans was a big shock. It was the biggest damage ever to this country. This morning I was talking with a journalist from Argentina, and she was telling me that only 6% of the people in Argentina approve now of America, and it was 70% 3 or 4 years ago. Then it was, this has been all over the world. I am surprised that no more artists have come and do something about, because it's a big issue that cannot go away. This has to, of course, remembered, has to be remembered. I did like a testimony of this. Of course, I know I'm not going to change anything. Art doesn't have that power. But at least I did give a testimony of what happened. I couldn't stay silent. And, well, the power of art is to make remember something. And that's, I hope that will happen with my work.
Seeing the paintings yesterday, I thought about the American writer Flannery OConnor talking about the American South in the years before the Civil Rights Movement. She said, when people were asked about her art, for the hard of hearing, you shout. For the almost blind, you draw large and startling pictures. And I think you can tell from the audience here, and for the 1,000 people lined up on the street who didn't get here, how much you've spoken for those people against the kind of moral numbness that has set in.
I tried to, I spoke clearly and loud the more I could. In my approach to art, I could do it. I imagine perhaps there are artists in America that work in an abstract line or conceptual that cannot be understood or express themselves. Perhaps they are also full of rage, full of anger, and they cannot do it. I had my approach to art allowed me to say things in a very direct way, and then to talk, to touch people without explanations. Just talking directly. Yes.
As a young man, I know that you went to Mexico and saw the Muralist painters, and that tradition of painting about and for ordinary people must have had an effect on you. Did that work?
Well, yes, of course. I'll tell you. I was born in Medellin, Colombia. It's a provincial town, very little information about art at that time. There was no museum, no gallery, nothing. The first thing that I knew in art, the first thing that I saw was the Rivera, the Orozco, Siqueiros painting that somehow came to Colombia. And of course, later I went to Mexico to see the thing. The important thing of the Mexican movement was that they took the reality of the country as a subject matter. Before, to make a portrait by an Indian is not worth as a subject in art. This has to be the aristocracy or some souvenirs of Paris and this and that. And then the Mexicans took the poor people and the Indians and all this and make the tremendous movement and say a lot of things. Say a lot of things. Of course, that was an important influence when I started. Later I went to Italy and saw the Ghraib master that actually inspired the Mexican, because the Mexican movement was inspired by Giotto, by Masaccio, by Piero La Francesca, Uccello, etc. They invented that. The language was imported from Europe, but they did care of the reality of the country, and that was a tremendous thing. It was very important. Yeah. Then, it's part of my formation, my background is this influence, this direct way to speak, that is, I think, is important. So many other things. I am the kind of artist that are afraid to be influenced. I had many influences, but every time I had an influence, I was richer in experience. I was richer. My mind was full of images that stay in the back of my mind and will come transformed later. Then took everything that I love it even more, and I took possession, and everything came in place in my approach to art. Yes.
Looking at the paintings last night, I was thinking, couldn't have been easy to live in your own mind with those images for 14 months to 2 years.
Well, I'll tell you, of course, it was not the same like when you do pleasant subject matters, you know. In art, sometimes you have to make like a parenthesis in your production or your activity to say something special that touched you in a special way. Mm-hmm. I did several times go out of my line of thinking of doing rather pleasant subject matter, because my conviction, most art in history has been done in pleasant subject matters. But you know, for instance, the drama of my country, I stayed 2 years working in these paintings of violence and narco traffic and all these things that was so terrible in Colombia. I donated all these paintings to the National Museum. One day, because my country will be peaceful one day, then they will see these paintings and they will remember how terrible, how stupid was all this violence, and this will not disappear, you see. Then it's like this, you know, in the 60s I did many paintings about dictators, military juntas, etc., because that was a reality in Latin America at that moment. Then I did satirical things, many. Well, you know, always, and then you always go back to the eternal subjects of painting, that are the still life, the figures, the animals, whatever. But because in art, what is art? It's doing the same things, but in a different way. Then, you know, you have to face this reality and see it in a different way. And because that is the art history is the history of people that saw different, not better, but different. Because in art, there is not that absolute truth, you know. Everything is truthful as long as it's coherent, as long as the artist has a tremendous conviction, a tremendous idea or conviction that touches everything that he does. Then that's the maturity of an artist, and this is what he can give to our history, is this vision of that is different and this coherent.
You started by drawing on the airplane, and then when did you move from drawing to painting?
Well, almost immediately. I got to Paris, I went to my studio immediately. I started immediately to keep doing drawings, you know, that are more elaborate, more constructed. And then after a while, a few weeks, then I started to paint in oil. That's always the way you do. You have to do a lot of drawing before you actually think of going into the oil paintings. And that's what I did.
And at what point did you, for how long did you stay near the photographs?
Well, I saw the photographs. They were very interesting as documents to know the atmosphere of the prison. You know, this corridor, this lighting that was very dramatic, because most of this torture happened during the night. And, well, you know, all this was very important, but it was no point to just take a photo and do a copy in oil like they did the imperialist movement in America in the 60s, that they took a photo and they did in oil. But that was an approach, but you know, in this case, it didn't make any sense. What I wanted was to visualize the atmosphere that was described in the articles, in the papers and the magazines. You see, to make visible what is invisible. Because, you know, this is the privilege of an artist. The artist don't have to be there in the moment it happened, but they can imagine and do a presentation of the thing that has this power, like it was actually an immediate vision of the thing. And of course, the concentration of energy and emotion that goes into a painting says more. That of course they clicked in a photo. Of course I partial to painting, but well, no, that's the thing, you know, that in art you have to concentrate so much the energy that somehow people feel it, that there is something truthful, and they feel it.
When you painted these paintings, what's your process? How much space is there for revision and reflection?
Well, you know, the paintings, of course, you have the same problem painting this that painting is still life. You see, because the problem is this coloring, composition, drawing, all these things that goes into any painting. You see? Then, of course, you start with the sketch that usually is done with the great violence, because it's like a spark of rage, a spark of anger that goes into this sketch. From this sketch, you pass these lines that are very few lines, you pass it to the canvas, then you start to paint, and you embed your painting in the actual painting, because when you start, 20-30% of what is going to happen. But then you start following the needs of the art, the needs of the painting, the coloring. You know that the problem is that you have to create a continuity in these colors, the balance of the composition, the drawing that has to be special, that correspond to your thinking, and this and that. Then it's at the end is in the moment you actually do the painting, then it is very close to every other painting. The only thing is that, of course, if you are painting a sensual nude, is another sensation. This is it's something that is staying in your mind somehow. That you are doing something that is dramatic, and then you have to convey this feeling of pain and anguish and humiliation that was in this prison, and the sadomasochistic, sensual kind of thing, because it was a mixture of everything. Then it comes to something that you are thinking about, that then somehow this gets into the painting, and people feel it. Yes.
I found people talking last night about the color in the painting. The red, of course, calls up the whole tradition of blood in Spanish painting. Stations of the Cross, Goya's disasters of war. It's quite remarkable in that way. All the Saint Sebastians and martyrologies that the paintings call up, and it felt like you could not have been aware of how many echoes you were making once you started on this process.
Well, yes, the thing is that through my life, I have been a painter for a long time, 58 years, then of course you get a lot of information, look in museums, look in books, look at everything. You have especially this Christian tradition of martyrs and Christ and everything, full of blood, full of bread, full of... Then, all this is in the back of your mind, and then you recognize that this was very present the moment you did it, but when it's done, in the moment you are doing the thing, you don't realize. But of course, the color, in order to paint these things, red was important, of course, because there was blood also in this approach to things. But as I said, it's the same problem that in any other kind of painting. You have to take care of the coloring as much as you have to take care if you are doing a landscape or a still life. Should be.
And just in the process, the paint has to dry for a while before you can go back with second thoughts? Is there...
To let it dry?
Yeah.
Well, yes. In painting there are two ways to do it. The Impressionist painters invented what is called direct paint, in which you mix the color in the palette, you put it there in the canvas, and that's it. And then Picasso, Matisse, Chagall, Braque, all these painters, most of the art of the 20th century was done like this, direct painting. And then the painters before Courbet, that was let's say in the middle of the 19th century, before they worked in a process that was like building up a painting through codes and codes of painting. And then in a way, they were doing like a writer. They say, you do something, you let it stay, you read the thing again, you edit the text, you let it stay, you correction and this and that, and the thing is being built slowly through these layers of code and correction, this and that. Well, I work like that. I don't work in direct way. I paint something, I let it stay 2 or 3 weeks, take a look, see something is wrong, I repaint the whole thing and change this and that, and I try to do as best as I can, and that's the way it is. It takes a few months to each painting, but if I put together the days, is not that I work 3 months. I work perhaps 1 week or 10 days in a painting. But anyway, it's not, I don't complete the painting the first time I take it. I have to let it, I have to criticize the painting a lot. I really have to not let pass anything, just redo the big parts of the painting if it's necessary, change things, and well, you know, that's my belief but that's the way I work.
So that would mean that if working on one painting and setting it aside, you could be working on another and discover something that would clarify.
Exactly. I work 5, 6, 7 paintings at the same time.
Yeah.
Because you have to let it stay and dry some weeks before you take it over again.
One of the things that's powerful about the moral imagination of the paintings that Beatrice Mans remarked on when we were talking the other night was that with 1 or 2 exceptions, we don't really see the perpetrators of the violence very much. This is very much about the victims, and in fact, mostly what we see of the torturers is hands, gloved hands.
And foot, and both boots.
And the boots.
But you know, the thing is this, for me, one of the things that made me the bigger impression in these photos that we saw was the fact that there was these green gloves that they have to touch the prisoners. I thought this was a terrible humiliation. This made me tremendous impression. This hand in gloves, green gloves, touching the prisoners. You know, then I thought it was more powerful to give all this space to the victim and only let the hand that you see touching the prisoner. If I have to split the space, then it was less effective. Then to make focus in the victim and the hand, or I did something in which you see both boots. Then you see, I thought it was more powerful. Yeah, I concentrated a lot into the victims, yes.
It's very interesting because in the American context, what we know about the sociology of the young people who were carried out the torture, apparently at the encouragement of the CIA and U.S. military intelligence, they're mostly poor white kids from the South. A girl who wanted to do absolutely anything so that the boys would like her. Kind of working class guys who got jobs as prison guards, full of anger. They got punished, to some credit that it was American news media, as you have remarked, that exposed the violence, and the soldiers who carried out the torture, some of them were brought to justice, but none of the people who initiated the torture or created the nightmare atmospheres that you rendered have been punished for what they've done.
You're right.
And so, the fact, for me looking at it, the fact that you leave out the torturers, except for the one guy with the stick at that point. We see the hands and we see the boots. The dogs do the symbolic work, I thought.
It's also very important in this, and they actually attacked the prisoner, not that they were menacing them. Because I have seen photos in which you see clearly blood coming out of the legs of the prisoners. But you know, like you were saying, you know, the thing that there was young people, these people never knew what was allowed and not allowed. There was not a clear definition of what was allowed, and then in a very ignorant way and very inhuman way, they did things that has no explanation. Yeah, it was a drama for them also. Yeah, very ignorant people, yeah, that did these things.
So, did you come onto the dogs and know you were on to an important part of your subject?
You mean the dogs? Well, the dogs were very important part, and then of course since I have a artistic problem besides the moral problem or what I wanted to express, then the dogs was an element important, you know, because then I introduced animals in the composition, because, you know, I had two responsibilities simultaneously. I have to responsibility with the subject matter and responsibility with the art, you know, because the art has to be good. Mm-hmm. Otherwise it has no, then it's nothing. Then it was very important that the art is effective from the point of view of painting. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, this element was important, especially in a prison where there was such a limited subject matter, in a way. Then, you know, the animals were very important, and the ferocity of the dogs, and the suffering of these men.
I was standing looking, there's one small painting that is just a profile of a ferocious dog. The skin of the dog is almost green, and the mouth red, of course, and it's very terrifying. And I found myself thinking about German Expressionism, George Gross, your paintings of the 1960s, of the dictators, how they seemed connected, how art critics had connected your work of that period to German painting of the 1920s. And I was running this number in my head and turned to the woman who was standing next to me to say all of this stuff, and saw a tear going down her cheek and realized that I had been defending myself against seeing what was actually there by running all this intellectual art history through my head while this thing was going. Yes, were you able to keep a distance when you were painting?
Well, no, as I said, you know, there is this spark of that you are creating the thing. There is like a spark of anger. You are angry. There is a spark that creates this. The sketch is something that takes seconds. You know, usually less than half a minute. You do something and this there, and there is a spark of anger that goes into this. Then, of course, the act of painting is something that, even if it's dramatic, is essential. Is something that you do with love. Then, of course, as I said before, it's not the same do a beautiful landscape or a still life with beautiful fruits and things like that to paint something that is in which you see human suffering. Then it's different. The experience is different. But somehow the act of painting is a wonderful thing, because it's like an ecstasy in which I always tell people, you know, to paint is like when you go to the movies. You don't exist. You see, it's the movie that exists. You are there. You know, one thing that is also interesting is that for instance, I'm standing 7 or 8 hours a day painting, and I don't feel I don't feel tired. If I go to a cocktail party, so in half an hour I'm dead. It's very strange, but I don't know why. You know, there was Picasso say something that is very interesting. They said that when you paint, you don't get tired because you let your body outside. But this is possible, but it's like a little ecstasy. You don't exist. What exists is the painting. You don't exist. You don't suffer. You are not tired. And you are concentrated completely, like when you go to the movies, but even more. Yeah.
That's wonderful. There's also, in the small paintings, thinking about their symbolism and responses of people last night. My wife was looking at one particular painting, and I went up to see what she was looking at, and she looked, as many people did, solemn at that, and she pointed at the back of one of those small claustrophobic canvases at the glowing window at the end of the corridor, and I realized that there was a kind of small symbol of hope.
Yeah.
And, yes?
Exactly. Yeah. But I like it to put in contrast to these dark colors and this dark grills and dark everything, and dark blood. Then I wanted to put, in every painting there is a little window in white, in which like it was to create the contrast between the light outside, the hope, this and that, and this atmosphere that was completely claustrophobic and terrible. Then this, to put a contrast, I put these little windows in every painting.
Kenneth Baker wrote a wonderful piece in today's Chronicle. We're very lucky to have such a gifted journalist and critic in the Bay Area. And one of the things he talked about was I don't know if he used this term, but what he said in effect was that because this was work of imagination and not documentary, that the figures in the paintings immediately became mythic and generalized, rather than mythic became mythic and generalized, rather than this Arab kid from the streets of Baghdad was these figures, these large figures felt like they belonged to kind of ecce homo tradition that both said, look, this is what man is capable of, and this is this poor, bare, forked creature. And also there was and if you add to that, or I don't know if you will respond to this way when you see them, or if this is also my looking with art history in my head to defend myself, it felt like these figures were almost biblical.
Well, I'll tell you, I was very impressed by the nobility of some of these people that you saw in the photos, because you have to understand that many were old people, and with beards that looked like prophets from the Bible. There was nobility people that grow beards because of religious conviction, people that has a tremendous dignity, they are proud of their religion and this and that. And suddenly they are in the hands of teenagers that they don't have any knowledge of their religion. They have no respect. Like they call them ragheads. You see, this was terrible. You know, there was no respect for these old people. That's why some of my paintings, I try to make it look like prophets. You know, like to show that these people has in their poverty and everything, they have a tremendous dignity, and that this was treated in a terrible way by ignorance, because of course these soldiers that are there, most of them are very poor people that were there, has no knowledge of anything that is not American. Then you see, then for me it was something important to try to give back dignity to these people. Then that's why when you see this being victimized, they keep a dignity because they have it. They have it.
Looking at that and seeing the biblical echo, I remembered reading that when you first, with scholarship prize money, went to Spain, that you set yourself up in the Prado and earned money as a copyist.
Yes, right.
That you must have been copying these great biblical...
Well, of course, you know, I won a prize in Colombia. My family was very poor, but I won this prize in Colombia. It's not a scholarship. I must say, very proud that I won the National Prize of Painting when I was 18. That was very important for me. Then with this money I went to Europe, and of course I wanted to complete my education as an artist, and I knew if I didn't learn the techniques and to draw and to do everything, I couldn't express myself. You know, the first thing they have to do is learn the language, you know, before you say a word, and then that's what I tried to do. And then I went to the Prado. I was a copyist there. And yeah, people passed by and bought this copy. Fortunately.
How much did you sell them for?
$100 or something less. I don't remember anyway.
And from Spain, you went back?
No, I went to a few months to Paris, then I went for 2.5 years to Florence, and that's where I stayed more because, you know, I tell you briefly how I did, you know. In my time, the dream was to go to Paris and to become Picasso. That's what everybody wanted. And then, you know, one day I was walking a night, during the night, and there was a book opening in a bookstore. It was a book that was opening in the reproduction of La Reina de Saba visiting Salomon. And that Piero era Francesca. I saw that reproduction and I thought it was the most beautiful thing I ever see, and that it was impossible to do something more beautiful. The next day I came to the library, to the bookstore, bought the book, then I decided that Florence was what I wanted to be. And that's how I changed my way of thinking. Then what I wanted was to learn about the old masters, and that's how I went to Florence, and I was, of course, very taken by Florentine art. And
how old were you then?
I was 19.
So you consciously at that point went from direct to indirect painting by going from Paris.
Well, at that time I was doing direct painting because that's what I did in Colombia.
Yeah.
But of course, when I started getting involved with technique and that I'm reading about, then I realized there was another way to do it, and then that's how slowly got involved with that.
And from Florence?
From Florence I went to Colombia, and then I went to live in New York for 13 years in 1960. Then I went to live in Paris in 1973. I have been living in Paris ever since.
So you arrived in New York at the height of abstract expressionism.
Exactly. You know, it was a very difficult moment because there was like a dictature of abstract art. It was, if you were not abstract expressionist, you were nothing. You were like leper. You see. Then you know, you couldn't get a gallery, you couldn't nothing. Then you see, then it was very difficult to stay there, and very slowly, I must say that I started being successful because a German museum director, invited me to do an exhibition in a museum in Germany. And then after that, many of the most important galleries of the world, like Barbaro, Claude Bernard, well, all these big galleries of the world, Hanover Gallery in London, approached me. But you know, for 10 years in New York, I couldn't get a gallery, I couldn't get any, it was very hard to sell a painting. It was very, very difficult times. Then after that, after I got approached to this gallery, then things became very easier.
People date from about 1962, the emergence of your characteristic style, these large, I've heard the word the critics use is volumetric
well,
figures.
you know,
Other non-art critics say big and fat.
Well, you know, I was very attracted to the volumetric paintings of Florence because they were very sensual. I saw like an exaltation of life in these paintings. As a matter of fact, as you know, Florentine art reinvented the idea of space and volume in art. Something that we take for granted now, but in the 13th century, paintings were flat. Nobody has the ability to create this illusion of space and the illusion of volume. It was a tremendous discovery. It was discovered by Giotto in the 13th century. Then, you know, I was very touched with this power of these paintings, the sensuality. Then I started to work in that direction, very interested in volume. But it was a few years later when I did something in which I was expressing in a personal way the volume, because what happened, it was really very simple. I was doing one day a drawing of the mandolin, and I was, of course, doing a very generous outline like I learned from the Italians. Then in the moment of making a hole in the mandolin, I did it very small. And then suddenly this mandolin became huge, monumental, because this contrast between the small detail and the generous outline, you see. Then I saw that I said, something happened here. You know, I really, immediately I started trying to visualize other subject matters. And suddenly, but it took a long time, 10, 15 years before I kind of developed more or less a coherent vision of what I wanted to do. But you know, the beginning was that little sketch, and my love of Italian art.
Fascinating. When you began work on these paintings, did it interrupt another project?
When I started working
The Abu Ghraib paintings, were you working on something else that you set aside when you began to do this work?
Well, no, I was coming back from a trip, and then no, everything was kind of. I just got there and started the drawings immediately. Yes.
It also.
I was really very motivated because I had been reading a lot about this, a lot. Yes.
Yes.
I read 2 or 3 papers a day and some magazines. Then I was very informed of what was going on.
Some people have expressed surprise that you did these
Well,
political.
I'll tell you, no, I didn't tell anybody that I was doing this. I must say I was working, and one day I found, I met a friend of mine from Colombia, has a small magazine there that they publish like 20 or 30 copies, 20,000 copies each issue, very small. And he asked me, what are you doing? And then I thought, well, I'm not doing these things of Abu Ghraib and this and that. Why don't you give me some photos I want to publish in the magazine? Then I gave him some photos. It's amazing, you know, I gave the photos, the magazine came out, the next day there was Associated Press, France Press, all these agencies that wanted to know what was going and photographing my studio and the painting and this and that, and it was sent all over the world. Because, of course, people were so critical about these things in Abu Ghraib that there was a desire to do something. Every time there was opportunity to make a denunciation, it was there, took immediately the opportunity. And then, you know, that's what happened with these paintings. That suddenly came very all over the place because somebody saw it in the magazine, and then, but the next day, I was amazed how this press agency knows exactly what is going on and immediately sent the broadcasting thing all over there. It was amazing.
I'm sure that right-wing and neoconservative backers of the Iraq War and of the war on terrorism will say about your paintings, as they have said about other objections to the war, that they'll wonder why you are not as outraged, why you're not driven to the studio by acts of terrorism in the same way that you were by these acts of torture under the auspices of the U.S. government. What would you say?
You know, what happened is this. You know, we know torture has been exist always. You expect torture in Africa or Latin America or Asia, but you know, the country that represent accusation, I mean, human rights, democracy, like is in this country, freedom of expression, like is in this country. All these things that I admire, and the idea of compassion that conveyed America. Then it was the shock. It was because it was unexpected. You know, of course, I could have done about torture in Africa. I did about the drama of my country.
Yes.
But you know, then it was what happened. It was completely unexpected, this thing. And yeah, as I said, the sympathy for the United States fell enormously all over the world because of this. This is the biggest damage to the reputation of this country. This policy or this idea of these prisons, the Guantanamo, and all this. You know, and the fact that these people cannot take it to a normal trial. That all this is seen very badly all over the world, and in America, of course.
Yeah, I had that same sensation, and I talked to a journalist friend who said something like that an Egyptian writer said to him when the United States started torturing people, it's as if a light had been turned off in the whole world. And I thought about that last night and thought about the howl of pain and outrage in your paintings and thought maybe they will help to turn the light back on
Good, I'm sure, yes. I'm sure. I'm sure.
I think this might be a good moment to invite the audience to ask Fernando Botero questions. I think that we have a microphone for that purpose, and I should probably repeat the questions in case you don't hear them.
I have a problem hearing, yes.
Thank you very much for coming. Yes? Testing, there we go. All right. Muchas gracias por haber venido. Bienvenido a México Norte. Y las imágenes se las damos. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll do it in English. Excuse me.
Thank you.
Okay. The images remind me of Giotto. They remind me of the Middle Ages. They remind me when first the church paintings got volume. The use of determination of space is beautiful. It's not so flat, but there are all these possible dimensions. But have you seen other people in the world deal with this very important subject of humanity? Because you are the first to give image, as it were, corpus, to the moral outrage. Are there many artists currently that you know of who have similarly been moved to oeuvres or to groups of work?
Well, but not really that I know. One of the reasons I think is because art took a direction very toward abstraction and conceptual, and then most known artists are in this direction. And when you are abstract or conceptual, it's very difficult to express this feeling like I do in my painting, because being a total figurative artist, I can do it. But I understand that perhaps there are artists in America that would like to say something. But the fact that they are in a line of work that doesn't speak clearly, then it's impossible. But I'm sure there are artists that would like to say, but among figurative artists in America, they were not doing this, and I was surprised because it's the issue of the day. This thing of torture is the issue of the day, and it should be addressed by the artists and by the American artists. Perhaps there are people that are working in this and they haven't shown their work. That's another possibility. Yes.
Thank you so much. And from everyone here,
Hello, how are you?
to exchange a touch of gratitude. Many of the people here are showing each other and the world that your art can motivate action, which is our sincere hope.
A question.
If we do actions outside the library every Wednesday, as World Can Wait organization, World Can Wait, has been doing every Wednesday about the torture, the actions could be to become the positions of the painting and to show clearly what a body in this state is. And I wonder how you would feel, number one, if the paintings took to the streets, so the actions occurred. In other words, we come off the canvas and we stand in front and we do the pose of the canvas, which we have done at peace demonstrations. If people continue, if the movement grows as action, how would you feel about this?
Well, I doubt they will come out of the painting.
Okay, I think we need the next question.
Okay.
Now.
Bienvenido, señor Botero. Es un gran placer tener un paisa en Berkeley. I was just in Colombia, in Medellin. My wife is from there. And I was walking in the streets and in La Plaza and in the museum. Your art is being exhibited. And I wanted to ask you if you feel that the people are very proud of your work there, the people, el pueblo. And I just wanted to ask you if you think that your work has helped in healing your country, Colombia.
He asks if you feel like your work has had a healing effect in Colombia.
The work that I have a feeling in Colombia, this Abu Ghraib painting?
No, the whole body of your work,
well,
particularly your work about Colombia.
Well, what can I say? Colombia has been my inspiration for many of my work. My work is appreciated in Colombia, I must say, at all levels of society, because I see sometimes very humble people that has little reproductions in their houses, but it gives me a great satisfaction. Well, you know, my belief is always that art should be provincial as a subject matter, universal as expression. They say that an artist has a communication with the world toward this thing that is called the art of painting. That is, every man on earth is sensible to this art of painting. Everybody loves two colors put together right, if they're right, and they appreciate composition, they appreciate balance, they appreciate drawing. These are things that are appreciated, and all the great movements of art of all times were local. For instance, one see the Impressionist painting, they were French. And then you see Goya is Spanish, and then Egyptian art is Egyptian. Then always the art started in a place, and through the art of painting, that is the language that man understands beyond the borders of the countries, then you touch people in many places. If you do it, if you really has this, you give priority of to the art of painting. Because the problem, when you talk about local artists, is because the man starts with the local subject matter, but he stays slave to the subject matter, doesn't let the painting, the art of painting, go on top of this and then speak to in the language that is universal. They stays with its little subject matter that is provincial. But you know, this all great art has been local, and then through, as I said, through the fantastic universal language that is painting, they touch a lot of people. Yeah?
Muchas gracias.
I'm curious about how the Iraqi people responded to your painting. How the Iraqi people responded to those paintings.
Do you know if people in Iraq have seen your paintings?
Well, this painting has been shown in the television in Iraq, yes. They were shown in television in Iraq and in many places. Well, I guess they reacted with sympathy. They understand, because they were the victims. I'm sure they reacted in a positive way. Yes. And in America also, they say, of course, you know, because the greatest majority of people here is against this practice. Yes, of course.
Muchas gracias. I wanted to ask you if the dogs also represented turning of the dogs, of fidelity, and of throughout history, the dogs in paintings have often represented.
You know, I'm going to have to ask you to begin again.
Okay.
And louder.
Louder. Good evening. So I wanted to know if the dogs were a turning of the dogs, because throughout our history of painting, especially, you have the loyal dog at the foot of a person. And then here, your focus was so brilliant because everyone can relate to an experience with a dog. And here they are ripping these people to shreds, and the tortures, you obviously immediately have a visceral reaction to that. So did you intentionally have the dogs be the perpetrators and representative of these policies?
Was it intentional on your part to make the dogs metaphors for the perpetrators of the policies of torture? My translation would be, when you were painting the dogs, did you think you were painting the heart of Richard Cheney?
I don't remember what I was thinking when I was painting the dog. Really, I don't remember. I'm sorry.
The microphone.
Oh, right here.
It's back there.
Hi, thank you. Buenas tardes. Being from Chile, we also had some great artists that have inspired us, like Víctor Jara through his music, Violeta Parra.
I'm sorry, you need to be louder.
Okay. Being from Chile, there's been some great artists that have inspired us and also have, talking to the people directly, like Víctor Jara or Pablo Neruda. And I think the art, like the Abu Ghraib or the paintings that you did on Colombia were very inspiring because beyond just being beautiful paintings, you were talking to the people and saying a message, which it means much more than just a painting. Like for us, like Víctor Jara, who sang to the people and gave messages, is something that's never forgotten and will never be forgotten. So I think it's very important as an artist that you feel to tell a message. It seems very inspiring.
I think it was not a question, it was a thank you for doing what the muralists of Mexico did by making an art that is for people and speaks to them so directly. Yes.
You talked about art as a permanent accusation, and it seems as if the way you want your paintings to be displayed as something that's permanently exhibited has a lot to do with inviting the public at large to kind of respond and contemplate these events. I was wondering what, if any, part of you completing these paintings is an invitation to the art community, and if you would like them in the future to take certain steps, or if you would comment on that.
How the art community ought in the future to respond to this body of work?
But this is, you cannot predict what is going to happen with your art. Let's say an artist try to do as best as he can and hope that his work will say something beyond his life. But so many things have disappeared so fast, being successful, and so many things that were not successful came into importance later. That's one of the most difficult things to predict, what is going to last and what is going to disappear. For instance, in the Biennale of Venice, when you see the list of people that won the big prize of the Biennale of Venice, I'll tell you, there are 2 or 3 that you remember, the others are completely disappeared or forgotten. Mm-hmm. Then it means, and these people were the people that won the Biennale of Venice. Then, it was the most successful artist at the moment. It's very difficult. I hope, of course, like any artist, that my work stay there as long as possible. But it's very impossible to predict anything in that field.
I think one more question.
Hello. Señor Botero, I've been to your museum in Medellin and I've seen your sculptures around the world. They're very good. My question is, when you were younger, you wanted to be like Picasso, and that's one of the reasons why you went to Paris. Do you feel you have accomplished your dream?
Good question. Do you feel like you have accomplished your dream as an artist? This young man who went from Madrid to Paris?
Well, beyond my imagination. I must say that I was very fortunate that I had the opportunity to show my work in many, many places in the world, that I lived doing that exclusively, having the tremendous pleasure of creating art. Then I feel very privileged that's all, Finally, is to be able to work and to be able to communicate with people. Then, for instance, today and with my exhibition here, I had tremendous pleasure that these paintings are saying something to the public. And, that's the biggest reward possible.
Wonderful. You're great.
I'd like to thank once again Fernando Botero for being with us, Bob Haas for doing such a splendid job of this conversation. And one brief word on the exhibit before we conclude. We are officially opening the exhibit at 6 p.m. this evening. Mr. Botero will be with us at the opening. We encourage you to come see it. And for those who do not make it this evening, it will be open from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. 6 days a week in 190 Doe Library on the north entrance. We hope to see many of you tonight. We would like to thank all of you for coming, and once again, to thank Fernando Botero.